Welcome to Lesson 3 of Drawing 1, Shapes, Proportions, and Perspectives. I can't speak today. Today we're going to learn about perspective and shading. We're going to learn about how light hits objects in 3D and how we draw objects so that they look like they are in a 3D space, even though we are creating art on a 2D surface. This sounds like it's going to be really intimidating, but I promise you, if you are diligent and you take your time, it's not that difficult. And there is 2 activities at the end of this lesson to help you practice this. So let's get started. Alright, so I have some definitions for you. I thought that was the best way to explain to you what perspective is, was to just give you the definitions and kind of talk about them. So perspective is defined as solid objects on a 2-dimensional surface drawn to give the right impression of the height, width, depth, and position in relation to each other. When we draw in art, we are always drawing in relation to everything else in the portrait. Because that's how we see the world. We see the world in relation to everything around it. So you want to make sure things look properly sized based on the things around it. Which we talked about in our last video lesson. Vanishing points are the points at which receding parallel lines viewed in perspective appear to converge. So when we draw in perspective, we draw towards the horizon line. And we draw to a vanishing point where our parallel lines that are parallel in real life, meaning they would never touch, appear like they converge. You know, when you're driving and you look down the road and you can see the horizon and it looks like the road comes to a point and gets narrower. But we all know that that's not actually how it works and that the road, it's just because there's distance. That's exactly how we draw it. The horizon line is the physical visual boundary where the sky and the land meet, or separate in this definition. But I've always taught it's where the sky or the water meets the land. It's way off in the distance, the point where it looks like the edge of the world is. Let's talk about light sources and shading for a moment. When we shade according to a light source. And this is actually a great bonus activity on screen if you want to do this, drawing circles and then shading them into spheres using different methods. This is what I learned in class. I think the activities I'm going to give you at the end of this lesson are a little bit more interesting, but feel free to do this if you want some extra practice. Adding lighting and shading can also add depth. It makes things appear, it's what makes a circle go from a circle to a sphere, is adding shading and lighting. Because a circle is just the 2D version of a sphere. Every 2D shape has a 3D version. And shading and perspective is what makes us, as artists, able to make our 2D shapes look like they are 3D shapes. I'm sure you've seen lots of cool art, and if you haven't, feel free to look it up. There's even, I think it's commonly done with street art, but it's like hyper-realism, where it looks like it's real. Like you could reach out and touch it and it would be real. They've captured that much texture and shading and lighting. We use shading to capture texture, which is the way an object looks like it would feel. When you look at an object, you can see lines and definition that would explain to you how it feels. A rock has bumps and ridges, and so we know by looking at it that if the rock has bumps and ridges, it's going to be rough to the touch. It's going to have bumps, and it's going to feel a certain way when we touch it. As opposed to like a stone from a river that's going to be super smooth, and we know just by looking at it that it is going to be smooth to the touch. When we shade, the way we push our pencil and strokes against the paper gives it visual texture, which gives the viewer an idea of what it would feel like if they were to touch that object. All right, into perspective, we have 1-point perspective, which is where you draw a horizon line, and there is 1 point on that horizon line where everything seems to recede to. It's done for hallways or roads or train tracks. I'm sure you've seen photos of this. It's very popular, very common. All of your horizontal lines recede to that point. Every horizontal line you draw should recede to that point. So the way we do this is I'll talk about this more when we get to the activity, but you draw the line and then you use a ruler to map all of those lines back to that point so that you know they recede there. And this drawing that we're looking at uses 1-point perspective. All the vertical lines are drawn straight up and down and do not connect to the vanishing point. They are parallel up and down, whereas our parallel lines going horizontally recede and aren't actually parallel when we draw them. 2-point perspective is another way of drawing perspective. There's also 3-point perspective, which is, if we go back to the first slide, this is 3-point perspective. It kind of combines the two. I've never used it in a practical setting, so I'm not going to bother teaching it to you. I'm sure there's great videos online you can look up if you really, really want to learn it. Or you could even talk to me and we can talk about learning it together. But it was used a lot in Renaissance art and isn't really used in the modern day. 2-point perspective allows us to draw street corners. It allows us to draw basically where two corners, where two straight hallways or streets or paths would meet. And you can see in the drawing below where they've drawn the horizon line, and there's a point on either end of it that the horizontal lines all extend back to. So this is a great way of me showing you. They've drawn all these lines, and while the top of this building isn't physically connected, you can see this sketch line where they've drawn it back to this vanishing point over here. Vertical lines are still drawn up and down and are not connected to the vanishing point. Great. Practice. Identify the light source of these images, because when we shade, we identify our light source, and so where the light would hit the object in 3D. I'll go back to that for a second, because I don't think I really explained that. We have blended, stippling, cross-hatching, and hatching. So hatching is when we draw lines. Stippling is when we draw dots. Cross-hatching is when we draw lines that cross like an X. And blending is exactly what you think. We kind of cover it in pencil and then blend it out with their finger or a blending stump or a piece of cloth. You identify, when you shade, identify where your light source is, whether it be an artificial light source or a natural light source like the sun. And how that, I want you to imagine a cone of light and how it would hit the object, and what parts of it would be in the light and what parts of it would be casted in shadow. So in these spheres, we have a light source all the way up here. It casts a cone of light down onto this sphere. The top of the sphere is in light, and as we go back farther away from the thing, it's casted in shadow. This white bit right here is called reflected light. It is light that is reflected off the surface that this sphere would be on. So if we go back to our practice, I want you to identify where the light source is in these images and whether it is in 1-point or 2-point perspective. I will give you a minute. Awesome. Go ahead and pause the video if you're not ready, but I'm going to go ahead and go to the answers. So our first image is in 1-point perspective. We can see that everything recedes back to that 1 point on the horizon line that I've marked here in green. So this is our horizon line, this is our point, and all of our buildings, all of our street go back here. Our light source is this big yellow circle. We have a natural light source in this. Both of these have a natural light source. But I know it's here because these sides of the insides of these buildings are shaded as if they are in light. They are lighter in color, and the back sides are shaded dark because the sun isn't hitting them. And that's how I know where the light is. The second one is 2-point perspective. We know because it converges to that angle point, and because we have some lines that converge on this side and some lines that converge to this point on this side. We have a natural light source again. It's on the opposite side this time, and it's a little lower. And you can see because this side of the building is lit, and this side isn't, and that's how I know the light source is over here. Alright, I have 2 activities for you to practice. I recommend you do at least one of them. Here's activity 1. This is a 1-point perspective practice. You're going to need a sheet of printer paper or a sketch paper. Sketch paper doesn't typically come in the standard A4 size. It's normally 9 by 12 inches instead. You're going to need a standard number 2 pencil. These are school pencils. The yellow school pencils with the pink erasers. You're going to need one of those, or a mechanical pencil works fine. You're going to need a ruler or a straight edge of some kind. A standard 12-inch ruler works fine for this. We're working on a pretty small piece of paper, but a 15-inch metal ruler you can buy at an art store is really handy to have for doing perspective. What you're going to do is you're going to draw your horizon line across the paper. You're going to mark out one vanishing point wherever you want it to be. It doesn't need to be in the center. I recommend that you turn the page landscape, so long ways, horizontal. In block letters, either above or below your line, I try and give it a good amount of space, 2 inches or a couple centimeters above or below, so that you have space to draw back to that vanishing point. You're going to write your name in block letters, and then you're going to use your ruler to extend those letters back to your vanishing point to make them look like they're receding. You're also going to practice shading this in a light source of your choice. There's an example, the word dream. There's a vanishing point down here, and you can see how they've extended all of the things back down. Do your best. It's a little tricky, but if you're patient with it and you go slow, you can get it. I promise. The second activity, if you've mastered the first one, is 2-point perspective. You're going to need the same materials, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to draw that horizon line, but this time you're going to mark out 2 points, one on either side of the paper. You're going to draw the 2 lines in towards the center, and you're going to draw where they converge. So if these are your points out here, you're going to draw these lines inside to create this corner. Now you've made that street corner. Practice drawing buildings on that street corner. You can also practice drawing light posts. They get smaller as they recede in the distance, or trees, same deal. Again, shade it. Use a light source. Look at reference images of streets and things to get a better idea of lighting, and do your best. I hope that this activity is enjoyable. It's a little bit tricky, so if you need help, I can send you some extra videos on how to do it. You can look them up yourself. Feel free to email me and contact me, because this is a little bit of a harder activity, so I am free to help you if you need it. Good luck!